We're going to finish our series in Samuel. I know we decorated for Christmas, and usually I do a Christmas series, but we're going to start that next week. So we're going to finish our series about when God calls, and the series that we've began a while ago in Samuel's. And I want to start off with a question for everyone. And this is, you can just raise your hand, okay? You can actually answer it. Would you rather take a test or write a paper? Does anybody remember that? Okay, so remember that debate in school. In fact, we have this in our house all the time. Stacy and I were totally different. Am I really echoey? Okay, sorry, it's echoing up here, and I didn't know if it was just me or if it was everyone else. We have this debate in our house all the time. Would you rather take a test or write a paper? Because me, I would rather take a test. Who would rather take a test? Okay, good. I like you guys. Okay, who would rather write a paper? Who would say, you know what, I'd rather just turn in a paper? Okay, yeah, half and half. That makes about sense. I am a test. I would rather just walk in, let me take the test, guess on the answers, whatever. I might study a little bit for the night before, get it done with, go home. I don't have to worry about it. Stacy she would rather write the paper so that she can make sure every word is perfect. And when she writes a paper, she writes out a sentence, and she deletes half of it and rewrites it, and then deletes a little bit more and a little bit more until it's like the perfect sentence. She does that in every one of them, and when she turns it on, she's the best writer ever, and it's just, when she gets done, it's great. But me, when I write papers, I'm just, type it out, turn it in. I don't even know if I read my papers when I get done with it. But today we're going to talk about taking a test, actually. Because in every situation or in life, we find that we don't get the choice on whether we get to take a test in life or write the paper out. What I find is in life, we're presented with many, many times, over and over, even sometimes before we study for it, we're presented with a test. It's like walking in school and it's like one of those pop quizzes or the pop, we're like, oh, I wasn't ready for it. There's so many times that happens in life. And I think this time right here, the event that we're going to look at is an event where I believe David was presented, with one of those tests. So we're going to jump in 1 Samuel chapter 26. 1 Samuel chapter 26. We're going to start in verse 1, but I want to give you a background of what's happened here, because since the last week's sermon, there's actually been a pretty big jump in the timeline. Saul's become king, and David, conquered Goliath and everything like that. Well, Saul became jealous of David, because people started to praise David more. People thought more and more of David than Saul, and David was successful in everything that he did. In fact, so Saul became jealous. He started to try to kill David. In fact, there's one moment where he's tried to kill David several times with a spear. And eventually it got so bad that David had to leave the palace, had to leave the area, run for his life, and David ran into the desert away from Saul. Now, King Saul's jealousy was so much that he began to hunt David like an animal. And wherever David hid, Saul would follow, and he tried to kill him over and over again. David ran into the Philistine country, hid there. He hid in the desert. He was hiding in caves. In fact, there was one time where David was hiding in a cave, and Saul came into that cave, and David had an opportunity to kill him. But he didn't. And after that moment, Saul was like, I'm sorry. You're the better man, David. I will never hunt you again. I promise you will be safe. Well, Saul did not keep his word. Saul broke his word and started hunting David again. And that is where we pick up in this timeline, where David, even though David knows he is to be the next king, God has already anointed David the next king. In fact, Saul even knows that David is going to be the next king. But David is running from his life, and Saul is hunting him like an animal. So that's where we pick up.
Chapter 26, verse 1. Says, the Ziphites went to Saul at Gibeah and said, is not David hiding in the hill of Hachilah, which faces Jeshimon? So Saul went down to the desert of Ziph with his 3,000 chosen men of Israel to search there for David. Saul made his camp beside the row on the hill of Hachilah, facing Jeshimon, but David stayed in the desert. When he saw that Saul had followed him there, he sent out scouts and learned that Saul had definitely arrived. Can you imagine being David at this point? Okay, he's been running for so long, and all of a sudden he realizes that he gets word, wait, Saul's back at it again. Saul is coming back at you again. In fact, he's right over there. He's right over the hill. He's on the other side of the valley. And David's like, certainly this can't be true. I mean, can't I just catch a break? Imagine David just being so tired and exhausted, like, God, I thought I was going to be king by now. Can't you just give me a break? So he sends out scouts, and the scouts come back and say, no, you know what? The word is true. That they weren't lying. Saul is over there with 3,000 soldiers, and he's looking to kill you again. So then David set out and went to the place where Saul had camped. He saw where Saul and Abner, son of Ner, the commander of the army, had laid down. Saul was lying inside the camp with an army camped around him. So David goes to check it out himself, and he sees this entire army. Tents everywhere. And there's one in the middle, Saul. Saul's in the middle, surrounded by 3,000 soldiers. He did that because it was impossible. You know, they wanted to protect their king. It was impossible to get to the king. They would set it up that way that no matter where you attacked, no matter what happened, the king was always safe. So David then asked Ahimelech the Hittite and Abishai, Joab's brother, who will go down into the camp with me to Saul? I will go with you, said Abishai. But David looks at his friends and he says, listen, who's going to go down? This might be a suicide mission. I mean, this is an impossible mission right here. This is mission impossible, where David's like, I want to go see Saul. I'm going to get to Saul somehow. I know he's surrounded by this camp, but I'm going to get to Saul. Who would like to go with me? And one of his friends is like, I'll go with you. I trust you. Let's go down. Abishai said, yeah, I'll go with you. So David and Abishai went to the army by night. And there was Saul, lying asleep, inside the camp with his spear stuck in the ground near his head. Abner and the soldiers were lying around him. Abishai said to David, I mean, this is amazing. He's like, he can't believe what's happening. There's supposed to be soldiers all around watching camp. That no one should be able to get into this camp. And they just walk in, and they walk up to Saul's tent, and there's Saul sleeping on the ground. And Abishai's like, this is amazing. He's so excited. He's like, this is impossible. David, God is working a miracle here. This is impossible. So Abishai said to David, today God has delivered your enemy into your hand. He's like, David, look at this. Now let me pin him to the ground with one thrust of my spear. I won't strike him twice. Abishai's like, look, what luck. They are all asleep. Now is your chance, David. You can finally kill your enemy. David, you can finally kill Saul. I mean, this is so lucky. We actually find out later in verse 12, you don't have to skip there, but I'll just read it to you, that they were all sleeping because the Lord had put them into a deep sleep. This wasn't luck. This was God. God was working a miracle, and he put the entire camp, all 3,000 people, and Saul and his bodyguard into a deep sleep where David and Abishai could just walk in and do whatever they wanted. I mean, they were asleep. Actually, I like this word, they put them to sleep. This is the same word that is used in Genesis when God did surgery on Adam and took his rib. It's this, I mean, they were completely out. They were unconscious. They were asleep. I bet you David and Abishai could have played instruments. They could have danced. They could have done anything, and they wouldn't have waken up. My sister April is known for sleeping deep. When she was a little kid, when she was really little, she would sleep through anything. There was one time we were in Ohio, we grew up in Mansfield, Ohio, and there was tornadoes that would come through, every once in a while. There's one time in the middle of the night, sirens are going off. You know how loud the sirens are. We're all running around. It is pure chaos in the house because the tornado is coming. And we all run down to my basement. We're screaming. We're pounding on doors. All of us are awake. It's only a small 3-bedroom house, so you can hear everything. We get down to the basement. We look around, and we're like, where's April? She was about 5 years old at this time, and we could not find my little sister April. So Dad runs back upstairs. She's still sleeping. It is so loud. I mean, you could hear it was crazy loud. So he actually picks her up. He tries to wake her up. She doesn't wake up. He carries her downstairs to the basement, puts her on the hard ground. She sleeps through the whole thing. He takes her back upstairs. The next morning, we're like, April, can you believe that tornado? She's like, what tornado? There wasn't a tornado. I mean, she was dead to the world. We actually used to feed her candy bars while she was asleep because she didn't remember anything. I mean, that is how deep of a sleeper she was. How great of a brother I was. I mean, that's what this camp is committed to. 3,000 soldiers so dead asleep. This is a miracle. God worked this out. And Abishai's like, look, David, look what God has done. He has given you Saul. Let's kill your enemy. But David said to Abishai, don't destroy him. Don't do it. For who can lay a hand on the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? As surely as the Lord lives, he said, the Lord himself will strike him. Either this time will come, or he will die, or he will go into battle and perish. But the Lord forbid that I should lay a hand on the Lord's anointed. Now get the spear and the water jug that are near his head, and let's go. David said, no. Abishai, no. We are not going to kill him. We're not going to harm him in any way. I know this looks like God set up a miracle where we can just pin him to the ground, as Abishai said. But that's not what the Lord wants. That's not what the Lord has commanded. And I can see Abishai at this moment taking a step back and saying, well then why was it so easy to sneak up? If we're not supposed to kill Saul, then why did God put everyone to sleep? David, if it wasn't for you to take revenge on your enemy, then why did this miracle happen? Why is Saul sleeping right there with his spear, where you can just take it into your hand and take care of your enemy? Why would God do this if that's not the reason why? I want to take a step back and I want to read something to you. There's a poem, I guess, in Psalm 26 that David writes. In fact, at this time, at this moment right here when he was hiding in the caves, this is what he wrote. This is what David was praying for. Are you ready for this? Psalms 26, 1 and 2. It says, vindicate me, O Lord. I don't know if it's going to be on the screen because I don't know if It says, vindicate me, O Lord, for I have led a blameless life. I have trusted in the Lord without wavering, and here it is right here. Test me. Test me, O Lord, and try me. Examine my heart and my mind. At this moment in David's life, David was praying to God. He was saying, God, I want you to test my faith. I want you to test me to make sure that I am following you wholeheartedly. See, here's my thought. Maybe God worked this miracle out. Maybe God put everyone to sleep because it was a test. Maybe God was allowing this to happen to help David's faith grow, to help his character become more like God's. This was a moment where God said, I am going to work this miracle. I'm going to test you to see if you are going to take something into your own hands or if you're going to still trust me. See, this is at least the second time David has had the opportunity to get rid of his enemy. This is at least the second time that we read where David has the opportunity to take the situation in his own hands and kill Saul. But I was thinking maybe it's not an opportunity. Actually, maybe this is a test for David. Maybe it was a test for David to prove that he still trusted God. Maybe this was a test to prove that David still trusted in God's timing. David asked to be tested, and I believe that's what God was doing. He was testing his faith. In James chapter 1, verse 2, it says this, it says, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith develops perseverance." James is writing this and he says, here's the thing. He's like, consider it joy. Look, there is going to be times where we are going to be tested. Because that's the way our faith grows. That's how we develop the perseverance. That's how we continue to follow Christ, is by the testing of our faith. That is how our lives begin to look more like the life of Jesus, by our faith being tested. So here's the thing. God allows us to go through tests. He allows us to go through trials to develop our faith. Every day our faith is being tested. In fact, all last week and all next week and the week after that and the week after that and the year after that, our faith is going to be tested. Every day God provides opportunities where we can build our faith. Sometimes we recognize them. Sometimes we see the test and we pass it. Sometimes we see the test and we completely fail it. So this morning, I just want to look at some ways that God tests our faith. I want to look at 3 different ways that God puts in our lives that He tests our faith, that helps us grow closer to Him. First thing, and this is what David was going through, the first thing that God uses to test our faith is difficult times. Hard times, problems, pressures, the tough circumstances in our lives. Many times He uses those hard, tough times to grow us, to test us, to see how strong our faith is. I don't know if anybody's ever had a hard time in their life, or if it's ever been rough, if you've hit a rough patch. But 1 Peter, he writes this, he says, "For a little while you have had to suffer great and all kinds of trials." Doesn't that sound like life sometimes? Sometimes it seems like there is a little while, or there is a moment in life, or a stretch, a season, whatever you want to call it, where we suffer and there is just all kinds of trials. At that moment where you're just like, oh, if one more thing happens, I'm just going to crumble. I mean, this and this and this and this and this. I just did a funeral last week of a friend of mine from West Virginia. He passed away, and his family, when I was talking to his family, they said, we have had 9 people in our family die within the past year. They said, this is just over and over. We don't know how many more we can take. I mean, sometimes it feels like for a little while we have to suffer great, and there's all kinds of trials. But these have come, this verse says, these have come so that your faith may be proved genuine. These trials come so that your faith can prove genuine, that you can grow closer to God. This is what David was going through at this moment. He was running for his life. His father-in-law hated him. His father-in-law was trying to kill him. David was living in the desert off whatever they could catch and whatever food they could find. There was even moments where he had to act crazy. He had to drool down his beard and act like he was just this crazy guy just to survive. Talk about hard times. I don't know how many of us in here would go through that and then still say, God, continue to test me. God, continue to test my faith because I want to grow closer to you. I think at that moment I'd be like, God, you know what? I think I've passed enough tests. Let's move on to those easy times. David never lost trust in God. David knew that if God promised, he would take care of it. David relied on God's promises, the promise that he would be king. And he said, God, I know what you've called me to do. I know what you have said. I know what you have said, and I trust you. His faith grew in God so much that when the point came where David could actually take the situation in his own hands, even though it would mean compromising, he decided to do what was right instead. See, so many times God allows difficult times. So many times God will allow hard times, will allow problems to arise, will allow tough circumstances in our lives so that we can grow in our faith. See, it's almost a guarantee. We live in a fallen, sinful world. We are going to have difficult times. It's a guarantee. But it's how we respond during these times that makes a difference in our relationship with God. I mean, James 1:2 said, next time we're facing those tough times, he said, consider it joy. Consider it pure joy. Next time it feels like we're just being overwhelmed with these hard times over, and James says, consider it pure joy because you're going to grow closer to God. When we're tested with tough times, we need to remember to do what is right, not to compromise our character, not to compromise our faith. Do what God wants, because that is how our faith grows. So God allows difficult times in our lives, but He also tests us through His commands. He has given us commands to live by, and that is one way that He tests our faith. So in the New Testament, there's 1,050 instructions or commands to obey. 1,050 times Jesus says, do this. And some of them, if we're being honest, some of them seem almost impossible to do. Or at least they're very inconvenient. Let me give you an example. He says, be thankful in everything. You know, that's one thing God calls us to do. He says, you know what? Be grateful in everything. How many of us is grateful in everything? Yeah, okay, we got one. That's good. You know, I mean, that is really, really hard to do. Be grateful in everything? You mean when my sewage is backing up in my bathroom and my toilet doesn't work anymore and the house stinks, I'm supposed to be grateful for that? I don't know where that illustration came from, but you know, it might have happened a little while ago. You know, I mean, be grateful when I'm stuck in traffic trying to, get somewhere. Be grateful, thankful when I lose my job. Boy, it'd be a lot easier if that command was be thankful sometimes or be thankful for the good things. But it's in everything. Boy, another one that's hard is do good to your enemies. Or love your enemies. Or he even goes further, he says, pray. Pray for those who hurt you. And not pray that they get hurt. Because that would be really easy. No, it's pray blessings upon the people that hurt you. We have these commands that God gives us, these instructions. And these instructions are given as a test to our faith to help us grow, to see if we will obey, to help us obey even when it doesn't make sense. God says, pray for your enemy, and you're like, I don't think so, God. That's too hard. And He says, trust me, just pray for your enemy and see what happens. Be thankful in everything. I don't know, God, that's even that. Yes, be thankful and see what happens. So many times in the Bible, God says, do this. And as we read through Scripture, when they do that, when they obey, even when it doesn't make sense, God delivers. God works miracles. For David, the command on that test was, don't kill my anointed. For David, it was, David, I don't want you to kill Saul. I have chosen him king, and even though he's not even obeying me right now, don't touch him. And so this miracle works out where David has the opportunity to kill him and finally live a normal life. And he says, wait a minute, I either obey God and I walk away, or I could take it into my own hands, disobey God, and I could get my life back. And even though it doesn't make sense just to walk away, David chose to obey God. I can imagine how hard it would have been to do that. Especially when it seems like God just, gift wrapped Saul. It was like, here he is. But David trusted what God said. David trusted in God. If you finish the story, God works it out his way. Question this morning is, do we obey God's commands? When our faith is put to the test, do we obey God's command? Do we do what God wants us to do, or do we take it into our own hands? Even when we don't understand why, do we still obey? God will test us through hard times. He will test us through his commands. And finally, and this is probably the hardest one on me, finally, our faith is tested through delays. I guess another way to put it, our faith is tested through waiting. You know, have you ever thought about if every prayer was immediately answered? Sometimes I think, boy, that would be nice. If I just prayed something and it was immediately answered, like it was yes every time, and God, boy, I could use $1 million. Poof, right there. If our needs were automatically met every time, if every problem that we ever faced was instantly solved the moment we asked for it, we really wouldn't need much faith, would we? It would just, everything would be taken care of. Our faith would never be stretched, would it? See, many times our faith is tested by having us wait. Many times God will test us to have us wait on things. And you know what? It is human nature to hate waiting. It is human nature to not like to wait for it. In fact, our entire society is built on trying to make it faster and faster and faster. Our entire society is to make us wait less. When we drive up to the stoplight, we stop, and I don't know if you do the same thing, but it's like, come on, when's it going to turn green? I even watch the other lights to see when they turn yellow so that I know when it's about to turn green. Does anybody else watch for the yellow? I don't know if Or even, we hate waiting so much that when we go shopping, we try to find the right lane that's going to go the fastest. That's how much we hate waiting. I was in Rural King the other day. I love Rural King. I was just going around and getting dog food and some salt for my water. And I was trying to figure out what line to go in. I got in one line and it was taking forever. And I saw another one open up. I'm like, oh yeah. I get in this line and the guy right in front of me had this really complicated order. And I look over at the line that I was in and they just started cruising. And I had one of those decision moments where do I get back in that line or do I wait? We hate waiting. Waiting in lines, doctor's offices. Everywhere we look, sometimes it feels like we are waiting. Sometimes God says wait. Many times God will make us wait to stretch and grow our faith during that waiting time. See, if we missed out on that waiting time, we would miss out on so many life lessons. If we skipped all that waiting time, we'd miss out on so many faith lessons that God wants to teach us in our lives. David was in that waiting time right there. David had to wait. In fact, it was estimated 22 years between the time that he was anointed king and the time that he became king. He had to wait 22 years before he saw God's promise fulfilled in his life. Talk about picking the long line. Talk about a long wait. He had to wait, but he trusted God the entire time. And during those 22 years, his faith grew and he did what was right. He passed the test over and over until finally God said, you know what? You are a man after my own heart. But David wasn't just born that way. David had to wait and grow and have his faith tested. When we find ourselves in those situations, and I bet we've all found ourselves in that situation, where we feel like we're just in a hurry and we need the answer right now. And I don't know if you've ever been in the situation where you're like, God, I need the answer right now, and you are in a hurry, but God seems to be sitting back, relaxed with his feet up, saying, no, that's okay, I'll just wait. Where I'm in a hurry, but God's not in a hurry. If you've ever felt like that, it's because God is more interested in growing your faith at that moment than getting things moving for you. We get in a hurry, so we start asking the questions, well, when? When is this going to happen? Come on, God, when is this? When am I going to get married? God. Or when is my marriage going to get better? Or when is this situation going to turn around? Or when am I going to find the right person? Or how long is it going to take until I get better? Or I'm healed? Or when are we going to have a baby? Or all these, when am I going to find the right job? There's all these questions. When? God, I want the answer now. I want this going. I want the ball to start moving. And we get in a rush. And when we get in a rush and we stop waiting, we stop putting our focus on God and our faith does not grow. Maybe when we start asking when is this going to happen? When is this going to happen? Maybe God is quietly saying, you know what, just be still. Be still and know that I'm God. Especially during this Christmas season that we're about to enter. Sometimes I feel like these last 2 months of the year becomes pure chaos, craziness. We have Thanksgiving, and then we have Christmas, and we have all these parties, and we have all these presents, and everything starts going fast, and then we're going to have New Year's, and it's like all of a sudden at the end of the year, everyone's just running as fast as they can in every direction and screaming. And sometimes I think God says, you know what, we just need to calm down. We just need to wait. Be still. Be still and know that I am God. Some of us might right now, some of you are waiting on something right now. Maybe you've been waiting a long time. Maybe you've been waiting, it seems like forever. But listen, while you are waiting, God is still there. While we are in that waiting moment, God is still with you. He does not leave you alone. But he tests your faith. Because God does use difficult times. Because he does use this moment of waiting, he also uses this delay to build your faith. I love Isaiah 64 says this. It says, God acts on behalf of those who wait for him. It pays off to be patient. So if you are in that moment right now where you are waiting, just remember this. While you are waiting, God is working. God's not taking a day off. God is working right now in the waiting time. You are not waiting alone. God is doing things behind the scenes. He's doing things in your heart and he's doing things in other people's hearts that we can't even see. And during that waiting time, we just need to trust that God is working. We just need to wait patiently. We just need to be still. David asked God to test him. David said, God, test me. Maybe today your faith is going through a test. I'm going to ask our worship team to come forward. Maybe today your faith is going through a test. Maybe it's the test where you're going through hard times. And God says, if you're going through hard times, the test of hard times, maybe right now you just need to rejoice. Rejoice in those difficult times because your faith is being tested. Or maybe there's a command that you're struggling with obeying. Maybe God's testing you with this command and saying, I'm struggling with obeying that, and God has given you this to obey. And you need to just let God take care of it. Say, I will obey what you have asked. You can take care of it. Or maybe it's through waiting. Maybe right now you are just in that moment where you just have to wait, and God says, don't give up. Be patient. I am here, and I will work it out. This morning, let's stand. Let's continue to ask God to test us, continue to ask God to help us grow in our faith as we trust in Him.